My name is Serge. I'm the client advocate at Code Engine Studio. With me is Kate. Kate and I have known each other, was it 5 years now, give or take?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
Worked on a couple different projects. Kate has amazing talents in fields that sometimes scare me, but overall pretty amazing brain power on a lot of things. But I'll let her introduce herself. So, Kate, who are you?
Hi, Internet World. I'm Kate Bartkiewicz. I generally describe myself as a marketing data scientist, but I'm a person that's been wrangling data from lots of different sources for the past 15 years, trying to understand and optimize really the customer journey from end to end.
So you would be the person who says the data matters.
I would be the person that says the data matters, yes.
Okay, so marketing is not just throwing messages and hoping they stick?
It shouldn't be, right? I mean, that doesn't make anyone feel good when they don't stick and they can't explain why. And it's hard to replicate when they do stick and you also can't explain why. And when one of the things I really love about analyzing customer behavior data is you're watching what people do, right? Not always what you want them to do, but just what you want to do. I started early in my career with this technology called Cloud Meter. I was working with them on this proof of concept when they were getting ready to launch. And it was like early screen recording, but with tons of metadata attached. It was really cool and also kind of scary. It was a different time, in terms of web privacy and technology and all that. But I learned so much just watching screen records of how people use stuff. And it's like you're almost cheering like, oh, and then you go up here and it's like, nope, they have no idea. And they're really trying to get through. And you have to learn how to optimize how people behave, not necessarily how you want them to behave. So working in this field is so fascinating. I get to learn so much about behavior. I was doing analysis of TV creative a long time ago, right? Like that was the
soccer world, right?
No, it was still in the technology world, but it was campaigns that utilized a lot of sports celebrities, actually. And so we were trying to understand, like, could we quantify the impact of having some of these celebrities in our ad and what messaging? And we had a lot of, so we had data on the ads in the run and time series analysis, but we also had survey data, like market research data on how people responded to the ad. And it was so interesting to learn, like, okay, the best combination is a creative that people like, with someone they recognize and all that. But the second best thing was something that annoyed the living end out of them. Like, they hated the commercial. They were like, this is so annoying. I see it all the time. But in terms of like the company and all the brand metrics, they remembered everything. So it's like, okay, if you can be good, like be good or be great. If you can't be great, be annoying.
Well, I still remember, I don't remember the name of the movie, but I don't know if you probably remember the movie with Howard Stern being the character, the main story in the book. And the movie, and the guy said, when people asked, why do you keep listening? The ones who really liked him said, well, we don't know what he's going to say next. People who hate him still kept listening because they don't know what he's going to say next. So I think there's a little bit of that factor. All right. Let me zoom out and kind of throw a couple of questions at you, because these are things that I've been thinking about, how technology and data work together. We obviously live in the generation world now where everything can be tracked and measured like it couldn't be 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? I ran ads in Alta Vista in last century. We won't go how far back. And to see the data was available now when you run ads is such a different world. So how would you say, it's a two-part question. I'll ask the first part here. How do you feel the quality of data has grown and changed, not just the quantity, but the quality of data over the last, let's say, 10 years, and particularly after the pandemic?
Okay, so in terms of, do we have better data now than we used to have? Mostly, yeah, and we're going to lose so many people are freaking out, right? But a couple things about that. When I was starting this field, you could create like a login with Facebook button on your site, right? Like a Facebook ad, and the data that you got back was bananas, right? It's like, oh, here's what every user likes and all of their friends and like, right? I mean, so in some ways the data that we had 10 or 15 years ago was bigger because there weren't privacy concerns, right? There used to be data that you could get on like any website that was referring whether or not you had cookie tracking. And all of that. But we also didn't know really what to do with that. Like, we had bigger data before big data was there to help us store, process, all of that, right? So in terms of, are we working with some data loss? Like, yeah, I've been working with data loss for the last 15 years in some respect. We get something new, we lose some other thing. Privacy is a back and forth stuff. I think some privacy stuff is good, but people are going to be annoyed. You're still going to see ads. They just might be less relevant to you, right? So people might be like, this didn't improve anything from my experience, and now I have to log in everywhere I go, no matter what I'm doing. That could be the future. But in terms of data coming along, I think the ways that data has improved and gotten better is that data quality and data governance is something that's top of mind for a wider range of job roles, right? Even in the marketing space. When I first started in this space, I would say like so much of my time was just cleaning up UTMs. I mean, like a huge amount of my time, because it was just like, nobody knows what's going on and there's no tools really to standardize it and just whatever, right? Like, Google doesn't care about case sensitivity. It was, crazy stuff that you have to spend a lot of time. But now I feel like everyone in the marketing team, no matter their role, like the data has to be clean on the other end. We still have issues and stuff, but I think overall deployment and caring about tracking and all of that has like really increased all around the organization.
So my second part of that question is, have you seen a change when we've crossed that line where we now have 2+ generations who've never lived without the internet, and then we have 2 active generations who, well, as a person with gray hair says, used to live without internet just fine for a while. Yeah. So I'm very curious what you've seen as far as both acceptance of the privacy limitations or overall willingness to work with data or willingness to accept data for decision making. Have you seen a generational shift, or are you seeing very clear boundaries between that?
I don't know that I have seen that much of a generational shift. And I think that overall people overemphasize maybe the need to have data down to a person, right? You know what data is really great now and easy to get and pretty accurate is time series data. We did this amount at this time, across all these different tactics. You can build like a pretty robust time series analysis. Now, if you do that and you don't have a measurable impact on your business outcomes, right, that's a probably wider problem than like, I can't trace this individual person down, right? These things went up within some delay. These other things should go up. And if they don't, you have a bigger problem. It doesn't matter if you can track down to the individual. Like, being able to model up at that higher level, I think, is sometimes more useful, because then we don't get caught up in all the fringe cases.
Yes, it becomes more of a messaging problem or product problem. There's, at the end of the day, you still have to have a product that people want to get.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something about the annoyance and people saying they have to log in. So 2 questions picking back off of that. We've all seen the lovely cookie warnings, right? Like, I feel like this has become so absolutely annoying, but universal. It's like every single site you go to, I was looking at some airline websites helping a friend buy a ticket, and it's every time you go in, every time you do this.
Yeah.
Are we just getting to a point where people are not even paying attention? It's so ubiquitous, it's so meaningless. Are we even finding value in it? Or are we just creating more work for developers and data scientists to have to come up with solutions with these limitations that don't really serve anybody? Am I overthinking it?
No, I think it's definitely a solution. Like I said, you're still going to see ads, or it's going to be less relevant, right? Like, oh, you have control of your privacy, but like, it's just made an annoying experience everywhere you go, right? Until it's like, hey, I get to universally kind of set my cookie preferences, and that just gets passed along in the universe. The thing that I've seen in the data itself is that far and away the people do whatever the default is, right? So if we apply European standards to US traffic, where it's a opt in instead of opt out, we're going to see like 40 to 50% data loss, right? Like half of the people are just closing that window. So their default is whatever the default is, and half are setting that. And maybe that's a lot. Maybe that's a lot than that care about stuff, is that half are actually actively making a choice, where the rest are just like, whatever, get out of my face. The thing that concerns me the most about it is I think that in certain locations or industries, I saw stuff the other day that in the US, it's like 12% of all healthcare providers have just removed every single cookie tracking, which means like all marketing decisions are being made in the dark because they're just like, compliance is a lot of work. Which to me is concerning, because that meant that 12% didn't have a very firm data practice to beginning with. Right? If you're like, I don't feel this thing is really driving us more value than making it compliant, like I'm just going to completely cut it. And that's where I have seen some of my clients that have like mostly US and some Europe, they're just like, we'll just only analyze US. It's fine. Which is like, that's a pigeonholed strategy, considering there are a lot of platforms and tools to go from this. And one of the things that we've been able to model in task, because we've been pretty strategic in how we've been able to roll stuff out, is to see, are people that change their settings statistically different than people that don't? Right? And at least in my research, that answer's been no. Nothing really material has been different about their behaviors or what they've been doing when we tested both of these things. So yeah, you have data loss, but all with any digital behavior, I try and encourage people, you should care less about what this number is and more about the direction that it's going in, right? Like because there's always been this, like the website said we had this many form submits, but my database says we have this many form submits. And when I look at Adobe, I have this many, we always have this data definition. And, the numbers themselves, I think, matter less than like what they're teaching you and the trends and percent of how those people react to everything. So even if you're only working with half your data, you're working with half your data that's 100% more than you just cut it. And I don't think that it's reasonable to say the people that you have don't represent the people that you don't.
Right. You're still getting a sample size. It may not be perfect, but just cutting it off, you can just...
Yeah. Frankly, you were getting a sample size before. Maybe you just didn't know it. Right? I mean, you're always getting a message,
yeah.
Yeah, and I go back to some of this like time series and this idea that we need to trace everything down at the individual. Sure, it's great. I'm sure you learn things, but you also learn things in the aggregate and from a time series. You learn things from whatever you're investing in your data practice.
So coming back to, we're a dev shop, we do stuff, a lot of our customers have gone into personalization, which you mentioned, people logging in and everybody having to log in on so many things. One of the arguments I make to a lot of clients is, well, if you get them to log in, what is the value you're providing?
Yeah.
And obviously there you do get down to a point, but you can still collect data in the aggregate because, people behave differently when they log in. You get a lot more personal information about them that they're willing to giving out because you're delivering value. How do you see this first party data being, obviously it's very powerful, right? Because we know what they're doing. And these are not just your one-time users, right? If you're logging into a site, dang it, if you create a login for a site, you plan to be back. Whether it's for shopping or news or whatever else, you plan to be back. So just kind of talk to me as far as the value of this, let's call it a portal, or, the term that we all love is DXP, digital experience platform. And how do we use data towards personalization, whether it's on the fly or whether it's long-term decisions of what content to even put out there?
Yeah. And when we say first party data too, like we don't always mean login, we mean submitted a form, right? But it's basically this exchange of information. I'm going to let you know who I am because what you're giving me back is worth me knowing that. I think people don't think enough about that process. And it was like, form all the things, lead gen, we've always seen this, like, here's a 1-sentence description of maybe what you're going to get form, right? When maybe I am so high up in this funnel, like I'm only kind of being aware of your product category. So I think what we kind of recommend when content creation, thinking about this gated, ungated, behind a login, not, create a matrix about where this person is in their customer journey and like what fit they are with their business. So if it's like, this is a high level information and someone's like really information seeking about the category, they're not in the sense where they're really narrowing down to a solution set. Well, if they're a category, the more people that you can educate on your category and the broader way you can be part of the conversation, the better, right? So consider ungating some stuff or consider ungating more of it so that people know, like, before I create this login or whatever it is, or require a form, like it's worth it, and I'm not just ending the conversation there. If they're getting down a consideration set, then you can keep going. I think the downside with all of us, so ungating is what the user wants, right? The user wants as much as they can and giving you as little as possible, right? So that's their intent. From our perspective, if we give all that stuff away, are we giving it to the robots that'll someday put it somewhere else and we won't be part of that conversation anymore? I think that's a valid concern and a call for a login or a gate. You know, my Emily, colleague on my team, I think has placed it very well. Like, there's been a new floor for where your content can be. I think there's this idea of like, you can just auto-generate all of your content. It's like, that's true. So in order for your content to be something that stands out, like, that is the floor that you have to beat.
Right.
So certainly you should be willing to ungate basically what can be, I don't know why you can't gate anything created by generative AI, because that's not proprietary in any way or unique to you. Like, anyone with a similar prompt could create something similar, right? So like, at a minimum, you should have something like that, available. I think the other pro with creating logins or some kind of login feature is that you immediately might get to identify evangelists, in that. And evangelists might be a minority part of your customer portal, but the data they might be giving you might be the most rich and telling of other things. So the more opportunities that you give them to talk about that, whether it's a community or a help center where they can ask questions, right? Like, see other tickets, maybe get access to a greater level of documents. You're kind of already subsetting your data down to what does someone that really cares about us do, and how can we get more of that? There was an interesting report by Trust Radius that came out, I think, last year on the B2B buying journey, and the number one predictor of someone buying software in a B2B role is if they were a previous user. Mm-hmm. Right? So those are your people. You need to know where they are, follow them, where are they going, are they bringing other people? Like, they're really your voice of the customer to get. So the easier you make that data engagement, story, trackability analysis, the better.
So going back to the first party login, or just the login in general, as I'm talking with different businesses, I'm trying to say, hey, it is worth for you to invest into creating not just gated content, but gated experience, whether you may have those, forums, or you may have conversations, or ability to have exclusive content, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's help files for assembling furniture that are better quality, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Can
or
you
maybe
think
like
of
industry relevant demos, right? Like, everyone
right.
is sick of trying to talk to a salesperson just to get a demo. Like, if I created an account, I would have access to like pre-recorded demos or something. That would be amazing. So
that would be a tool, and within the tool, that would be a good one.
Right.
Can you give me a couple examples? Let's particularly talk about, B2C, that would benefit from a login beyond just gated content, or things you've experienced that would give people both the value and then really quality data that will let them grow their business beyond just getting people to log in.
Obviously, it's helpful for people to have purchase history. Right? Like, for lots of reasons. Preferences, if you're clothing or apparel, fit data can be really helpful to store, and that can be a value add. Integration with other like wish lists or product watch, like, hey, I really want this thing, but I want to wait till it's on sale. There's third-party vendors doing that, so you may want to consider doing that benefit yourself and keeping like the customer information, and data around that. User tips, right? Like, right, if I'm buying a fancy camera, having access to tutorials, right, could be helpful for me. If I'm buying exercise equipment, having content on like how to better use it and things like that, right? All of your products should have some kind of user story that you can have. And so some of that content there, like, yes, could they go and find it out in the universe of TikTok? Like, probably, maybe, but if you made it good and meaningful,
curated, right? You
useful and curated, right? Yeah. Then I think that that all certainly helps, and you can measure how well that's working in a lot of ways in pretty simple KPIs, like what's the percentage of direct traffic landing on those repositories or on your landing page. Like, that is a measure of your brand strength over time, and seeing that your domain is top of mind with people, and how these things are impacting that.
Some really cool stuff. All right, my last big question, we'll see where we go from there, is as we're training our developers to be better at understanding things like user experience, even design, because it's not all about code. And of course, everybody believes that AI is going to take over front-end development. On some level, it probably will, but maybe not the next week. What are the things that our team as development team, our developer training should account for when it comes to the data side of user experience, the data side of integration? Obviously, obvious thing like GTM, GA, whatever it may be. But let's go a step deeper. What should they be aware of?
I think in terms of customer portal user experience, particularly, one of the things that people should think about is people are probably coming with a chat first mindset, right? Just like our generation learned to be very specific with Google searches, right? So long tail keywords and like, what is this and how do you do this, and the very best or top, like, we've all learned how to search to Google for an optimized experience. Upcoming customers and customers now are learning the same way how to interact with chat experiences. I also think a lot of us are really failing to deliver on that. It's like we have a chat window, but it's really just like 3 branches of logic. And we're just like, schedule something with somebody we don't know. Right? So I think that there's a lot to be learned from that. And one of the ways that you can inform your chat data is good user interface experience, right? Like, someone tried to do this, that, the other, then they opened a chat. Okay, that sequence of events, what is the page, what is the content, where are they in the customer portal, can give you ideas about what kind of use cases you need to have. I also think everyone is kind of like, in the future, we won't need sales reps or customer support because chat GPT or some kind of LLM, internal LLM, can do all that. And I don't want to say that's not possible, but it's certainly not possible with a lot of internal lift on your end. Like, what information do you have available to train your own LLM today? Right? I have some clients I work with that I think are thinking that that's their future, but their base site isn't search optimized. So it's like, how the same bots that are crawling this is not unlike the one for this chat. Like, all of your documents and internal documents, do you have a process in place to be able to start to build your own LLM on all of that? Because if not, that experience is going to fall flat, and you probably have a competitor that is doing that, is preparing in that way. So their experience will be naturally better than yours because it's more dynamic to that user, right? So I think taking those steps and thinking about that stuff now is important. So analyzing that data of like, what are the key questions that people have that they're asking? Where are they getting stuck in our user interface today? How do we build up the resources? How do we make sure we have metadata on our documents and that things are well structured to train our own LLM is, where you're going. And I think too, a lot is, we all watched, people my age and here, right? We all watched like Watson playing IBM and we're like, amazing, right? But like the way that we interact with Watson actually today is probably pretty boring compared to that use case. There's like a little bit everywhere, but it's not, we have a helpful robot we just asked all our questions to. I personally am struggling to have Gen AI live up to the promise that I would like it to in my own work, right? There's like a lot of data sets I want to be able to work with that are just too tedious that I want to get these LLMs to like restructure or categorize, and I just haven't gotten the performance there where it can take me out of it. So I'm also skeptical of how robust some of these use cases are going to be when some of the things that are impressive that we've seen have been extremely curated demos and use cases, right? And there's going to be more noise in all of those models unless we build our own, and building our own is going to require a lot of work, right? So starting to take those steps today, I think, is an important thing for developers to look at, and also to like figure out the best way for those chat experiences to be integrated with the user interface. Do you want to have a chat returning bank account values to you? Like,
maybe not.
I don't know.
But I love your idea of giving them a chat option when they are hitting a wall somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Especially where it was not expected.
Rage clicks.
Yes.
Right? Like, that's one of those things, that's a signal you can pick up back and forth. Get them with a chat, right?
So fun thing, Code Engine, we have an internal Slack-like environment. We use open source one called Mattermost, and our guys built in a couple chats in there, including one focused on the HR stuff. Hey, how many days I have left, vacation, or things like that. And we're also training on our internal documents. So what is the policy for refund when I, buy a course or stuff like that, or where do I submit it? And just that idea of, you mentioned something almost like a private GPT or private chat system where you can still pull in data from public source. And I think I'm seeing this both in the customer interest from the portals, whether it's parsing third-party data in a way that nobody else is doing, so you can train it your own way, like you said. But it's also accessing your own private data to the level of, hey, we have something to offer, and maybe you don't have to go read through I'm a football guy, so somebody just sent me a 84-page manual for updated rules for IFAF, International Federation. I'm like, really? Can you just show me what changed?
Yeah, exactly. That would be great. Like, what do I need to be aware of? This is my role.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And the data that feeds that proprietary data, like, that's your differentiator in the future.
Right. So I think there's value for us as developers to learn how to plug that data in and then be able to train models working with data scientists to be able to create the outcomes. But I think you're right about the fact that it's still not fully baked. I guess the way I would look at it is I get response sometimes. I go, oh, you're so close. You're so close. Even when I go to Gemini or whatever other tools we use, I go, yeah, not quite there. And try things, and sometimes you feel like, especially because I'm not as chat driven, because I like you said, I'm one of those people who train how to ask Google exactly the
you got
question that I
Google
wanted
down,
to
right?
ask.
Like,
right. And I can't seem to whip that Gemini into shape to get it to give me the answer that I want. Well, you mentioned something that's kind of makes me go this. One of my concerns about both the data and the content side of things is the noise you mentioned, because I feel like, I read 10 years ago that more pictures were taken from 1980 till 2010 that were taken the entire history of humankind before, and then next decade that number got surpassed because we're just creating content with our phones. And I'm wondering, at what point, even if I ask for something, unless it's a curated data set, unless it's a private data thing, but very silly example. I was looking for a recipe for a particular barbecue sauce, and I know what's in it. I just didn't remember the ratios. And I got so many wrong answers from ChatGPT. I was like, okay, you're not getting it. But what I'm concerned is because it's finding the answers online. It's not just imagining them. Because we're getting so much auto-generated content that doesn't always get checked out. How do we diminish noise? Or is the only answer creating private data sources?
Yeah, I don't know. In some ways, I think that, yeah, creating something proprietary. Because if you look at the future and how companies are reacting right now, and like, okay, sites that are great at content, I think are locking them up behind user gates, right? So really good content is going to be pulled out of what can be part of these public LLMs. And the volume, whenever there's a spam opportunity, there is an entity waiting in the wings, right? So recipes, I think, is a great example. There's so much, like, even if it's like, oh, this ad revenue off this recipe was a fraction of a cent. Okay, well, that's a scale challenge, right? Like, flood the market. If we're number one from every recipe, right, then we're adding up those fractions of a cent. So there's an incentive for kind of bad actors to flood the market with generated AI. I think if you look at Etsy shops, it's a real good example of how this is happening in real time. Like, there's just a huge amount of generated AI content there now, which is like kind of flooding the market. And it's like someone is going to that experience to find something seemingly unique, which is why they're going to an Etsy shop rather than maybe an Amazon or, you know, something like that. So there probably will be a bigger need for like greater curation. So how do you offer that? Oh, well, I have an LLM that has been built on some data set that I have curated, or that's harder to get to, or is locked up, right? Like, you can have influencer LLMs of certain things that they've created around, oh, here's the best recipe LLM using like a curated, data set and database. Yeah, that sounds like a good way to add value in the future. Do those LLMs perform better? Like, personally, I don't know, because I haven't ventured into that level to get the volume of data into something like that. You know, I guess that's a thing that we'll see. Is there still going to be hallucination and maybe something making up a recipe? If you're like, I have these ingredients in the fridge, make me up a recipe. Like, probably. I don't think that you can ever get rid of, from what I've heard talking to experts that know it certainly much better than me, hallucination. Is there a bug or a feature, depending on how you're looking at it, but it's probably here to stay.
Yes. I think there's going to be a fine balance. I think curated content is very powerful. And I think, the idea, I can't remember which serious influencer talked about, this is where the value of the humanities degrees comes back to play, not just, people who are coders, because now you can say, okay, let's work through what we're creating and make it better.
Yeah.
But I am genuinely concerned that within the noise of the volume, that people are not going to take the trouble and they're going to just make whatever they need to make, which I appreciate the curators could go through the table and say, hey, we tested this and this is garbage. Here's the real thing, right? America's Test Kitchen, if we're talking about recipes or, stuff like that, as opposed to somebody who auto-generated, like you said, for a fraction of a penny, created 10,000 pages to do that. And well, this has definitely been a lot of fun. And I know you and I can keep talking about this. And I know you have a ton of knowledge. Last thing to cover, when you're working with developers, I know you've managed projects with developers. You work with our team. You work with other teams. Yeah. What are some of the things that you've had to learn and understand from a customer perspective, particularly how developers think and things you have to explain to them differently? Is there any advice you give to somebody who's coming on to work with developers, not just as a data scientist, but as a person who had to manage a product or a project within the development environment?
Well, one of the recommendations that I would have, if you're working with a developer department, any developer team, is to know what is your need. You need headcount to fill in seats on a team that exists, like a structure, like we need someone to seamlessly fit into here, then you probably need a requirements team, right? Like we have very specific requirements for how something is done because you're filling seat 4 on a 6-person team, right? And we're hiring a partner, using a partner. Or you have use case requirements, right? Like I need to work with a partner that's going to help me solve a lot of the unknowns because I have this level of expertise and I need to add this component, and I have more of a use case, requirement in terms of how those things get solved and what technology is used to solve them. Those are probably of a less concern, right? What you need more is the thought leadership and like, what else am I not thinking about in the use case going down? So I think just going through that exercise in terms of which you're looking for is helpful. I see this when people are trying to hire data scientists too. Like, are you being overly prescriptive about the tech, the language, whatever, because it's easier to write that? But what you actually need is more thought leadership, and you don't care how someone answers the question. You just need someone that's got a really good thought process for answering the question. So I try and work through that exercise. I've certainly worked with teams that are on either side. And when you're working with the requirements team, having someone that can translate those very specific requirements between the user to that person is very important. When you're working on more of the open-ended and, hey, I'm trying to solve a use case and walking through that, I think documentation is much less important and in some ways less useful than regular conversations.
There you go. Yep.
Right. So making sure you're allocating enough time for all the like in-person dialogue on sessions, because that's when you walk through, those scenarios and like, yeah, you're going to build diagrams out of that, but like that is so much better time than like I spent 3 hours building like what I thought was a requirements document, but really like we need to walk through a hierarchy system for user accounts, right? Like it's something that a language I don't speak. We just need to talk through like how we need this to work.
Yeah. So in most cases, I think if you're doing staff augmentation that give us exactly what the skill sets you need to have, then you know how to use this particular version of Git or whatever it may be. If you're trying to build a product, if you have a particular function with the product you're looking to add, tell us what you want us to achieve, but also, like you said, continue these conversations. And I think this is where sometimes you get to a danger spot. Well, I told you guys what to do. Just deliver it to me. Well, okay, it's a continual conversation. Hey, let's do
you're going to get something so far. Like I've definitely seen that where it's like, oh, we have a meeting, and then 6 months later, deliver something to me, and it's like, yeah, you missed so many use cases, or you talk to a user but not like a regular user. Right. So I've seen so many misses from that. So yeah, really, if that's your scenario, really setting up like weekly, twice a week, hours a day, that means you have to prioritize the availability to have those conversations. You need to make sure your teams work in time zones where you can have those conversations and it's feasible. Like all of those, I think, would be the things to consider. And the person in that room doesn't need to be the most technical. The person in that room needs to understand your use case the best.
Yeah. It's important that the product owner from the development side understands your business goals, business needs, and can dive in deep. I know that when you and I worked on a project, I think I understood what you guys were doing better than some of our developers, but it was part of my job to translate. And then at the end of the day, I got to know your product. I may not know all the things, that our favorite Amazon tool was doing and how it was doing, but I understood what you're trying to get to.
And I think that can be really helpful to have on there someone beyond like the technical build, but more of a business domain and use case. And, oh, would you like it to function kind of similar to this thing that exists out in the space? Or, I think that can be very helpful to have, particularly when we're getting started.
Yeah. Well, Kate, thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the lovely Southern California weather and the day while I'm enjoying my night. And we'll stay in touch and talk soon. And hopefully folks will enjoy this episode. And everybody listening, please come back for the next episode of Techtonic Lounge, where we'll talk again how technology and business solve problems.